It was just another busy afternoon at the Silver Spoon Cafe, a cozy little spot tucked between towering office buildings and the hum of city traffic. Waitresses moved briskly from table to table, balancing trays, refilling coffees, and offering polite smiles to customers too caught up in their own lives to notice the tired lines on their servers' faces. Sandra Matthews, in her modest uniform and worn-out sneakers, had been on her feet for nearly 6 hours without a proper break. Her hands ached, her lower back throbbed, but she didn't complain. She couldn't afford to. Life hadn't been kind lately, and this job, humbling as it was the only thing standing between her and the final eviction notice waiting in her mailbox. She brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear as she approached table 4, pasting on a smile that barely reached her eyes. "Hi there. Welcome to the Silver Spoon. Can I get you started with something to drink?" Her voice was polite but distant, practiced. She didn't even look up at the customer at first. She rarely did. People didn't come to this cafe to make conversation with the staff. They wanted coffee, food, maybe a moment to scroll through their phones or hold business meetings. They didn't care who brought them their meal, as long as it was hot and on time, but today was different. The man at table 4 looked up from the menu and locked eyes with her. For a second, something flickered across his face. Confusion, recognition, maybe a mix of both. Sandra felt it too. That strange sense of familiarity she couldn't quite place. His suit looked expensive, his watch easily worth more than her rent, and he carried himself with a kind of quiet confidence that only comes from years of success. But beneath all that polish, there was something about him that tugged at her memory. "Wait a minute," the man said softly, narrowing his eyes. Sandra blinked, hesitated, then finally looked directly at him. She studied his face, the sharp jawline, the deep-set eyes, the dimple on his left cheek when he smiled, and suddenly, time rewound. The smell of old-school hallways filled her nose, the sound of laughter echoing in her ears. This wasn't just another customer. This was Stephen Carter, her old classmate from high school, the boy who used to sit behind her in math class, who shared peanut butter sandwiches with her when she forgot her lunch, who once made her laugh so hard during a school assembly that they both got detention. She nearly dropped her pen. "Stephen," she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. His smile widened, now fully formed. "Sandra Matthews. Wow, I can't believe it's you." Her heart thudded in her chest, and for a moment, the bustling cafe around them faded into a quiet blur. Years had passed. They were different people now, older, worn, changed by life in ways neither of them could have predicted. And yet, standing there, it was like no time had passed at all. Sandra wasn't sure what to say. She hadn't seen him since high school graduation. Back then, they had promised to stay in touch, maybe even go to college in the same city. But things didn't work out. She had to move out of town, and the letters stopped coming. Life took over, and now, here he was, sitting in her section, dressed like a Wall Street executive. While she was wearing a stained apron and hoping no one noticed the scuff marks on her shoes, she managed to smile. "It's been a long time." "It really has," Stephen said, still staring at her like she was a ghost from another life. "I almost didn't recognize you. You look great." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Yeah, well, don't let the uniform fool you." Stephen tilted his head, sensing something beneath her words. But he didn't push. "Are you working here full-time?" Sandra nodded slowly, glancing at the counter where her manager was already giving her a look. "Yeah, just trying to make ends meet." There was a beat of silence. A brief, awkward pause that neither of them knew how to fill. Stephen gestured to the seat across from him. "Do you have a minute to sit?" She hesitated. It was against policy. But something about this moment felt bigger than rules and routines. She glanced at the clock, did a quick mental calculation of how many tables she could afford to ignore for 5 minutes, then carefully slid into the booth across from him. "So," he said, folding his hands together. "Tell me everything." She gave a small shrug, unsure where to even begin. "There's not much to tell, honestly. After high school, I moved with my mum. College didn't really happen. Then, life, a marriage that didn't work. Some rough years. Now I'm here." Stephen nodded, his expression softening. "I'm sorry." She waved it off. "Don't be. It is what it is. What about you? Looks like you've done pretty well." He smiled sheepishly. "Yeah, I guess I've been lucky. Tech startups, investments. You know how it goes." She didn't, but she smiled anyway. Was something surreal about sitting across from someone who once used to share homework answers with her. now looking like he belonged on the cover of Forbes. The gap between them felt wide. Not in emotion, he still had the same warm eyes, but in circumstances, he seemed to notice it too. "You know," he said gently, "back when I first moved to the city, I worked as a waiter. 14 shifts, bad tips, aching feet. It's not easy." Sandra's eyes met his, surprised. "Really? Really? Everyone starts somewhere. There's no shame in the hustle." That line stayed with her. They talked a bit longer, about people they used to know, silly memories from school, how the world felt so much bigger now. But as she stood up to return to her duties, Sandra couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Nostalgia, embarrassment, curiosity, and something else she couldn't quite name. "Hey," Steven said just before she walked away, "would it be okay if I stopped by again sometime?" She paused, caught off guard. "Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a public cafe," he laughed. "Fair enough. But I meant, maybe just to catch up again. As friends." Something warm flickered inside her, despite herself. "All right. As friends." And with that, she was gone, disappearing into the blur of customers and orders and clinking dishes. But her mind wasn't on coffee or table numbers anymore. It was stuck on the man in the booth. The boy she once knew, now a billionaire, and still somehow kind. That night, as she counted her tips and tied up her apron strings, she found herself smiling. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was how this one chance meeting was about to change her entire life. Because Stephen Carter wasn't just passing through. He had seen something in Sandra that she had forgotten she possessed. And this was only the beginning. But not everyone would be happy about his return. And soon, Sandra would have to decide how far she was willing to trust someone from her past, especially when the present was still so fragile. And just as she was locking the cafe door for the night, she heard her phone buzz. A message from an unknown number. "It was really good seeing you again today, Sandra. I meant what I said. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." Stephen. She stared at the screen for a long moment. The cold air brushing against her cheeks. Her heart doing something it hadn't done in a long time. It fluttered, but she had no idea that behind Stephen's kind eyes and warm smile, there were things he wasn't saying yet. Things that might change everything. The next morning, Sandra stood in front of the cafe's small mirror in the back room, tying her hair up with an elastic band she'd used a few too many times. Her thoughts were somewhere else, still caught on the message from Stephen. She hadn't replied. What could she say, anyway? "Thanks for remembering me," or "It was weird but nice seeing you." No message felt right. She didn't want to seem eager, or worse, desperate. Not that she wasn't desperate, just not for pity. Work moved slowly that day. Every time the bell over the door rang, her heart skipped, half expecting him to walk in again. But he didn't. And maybe that was better. Maybe it was just one of those things, a moment, a memory, not meant to become anything more. But Stephen did come back, 2 days later, just as she was wiping down a table near the window. He was dressed more casually this time, like he wanted to blend in. No tailored suit, no polished shoes, just jeans, a jacket, and a quiet smile. "Hey," he said, standing near the counter. Sandra looked up, caught off guard again. "Hey, you came back. I said I would." He smiled, and I meant it. She blinked a few times, unsure how to respond. He wasn't just being polite. He seemed genuinely interested in being here, in seeing her again. And she didn't know what to make of that. They talked again. This time she didn't sit down, but they shared a few laughs, swapped small updates. And before he left, he placed a generous tip in the jar, enough to cover her dinner for a week. But she noticed how quietly he did it, how he waited until she turned her back, like he didn't want her to notice. That told her something about him. He wasn't here to show off. The visits continued. Sometimes he'd come with a book and read in the corner. Other times he'd just chat with her when things slowed down. His presence became something steady, comforting, even though Sandra tried to keep a wall up. He was successful, wealthy, and clearly lived a different kind of life. She couldn't imagine he'd stick around for long. But Stephen surprised her. One rainy afternoon, after the cafe emptied out, he invited her to take a walk. They strolled under an awning-covered sidewalk, sipping coffee and talking about the old days. Sandra found herself laughing in ways she hadn't in years. For a moment, she felt like that young girl again, the one with big dreams and a sketchbook full of plans. "Whatever happened to your art?" Stephen asked, holding the edge of his umbrella over her as rain fell around them. She hesitated, then looked down at her feet. "Life happened. I stopped drawing years ago." didn't make sense anymore. Stephen didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. That's a shame. I remember you were really good. She wanted to brush it off, but something in his tone made her pause. He meant it, and more than that, he still remembered. After that day, something began to shift between them. He wasn't just an old friend. He was someone who saw her, even when she tried to hide. Still, she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that it was too good to be true, that maybe he'd get tired of showing up one day and just disappear like everyone else. Then came the evening he showed up with someone else, a sharply dressed woman in heels and red lipstick. They took a table in the corner, and Stephen barely looked her way. Sandra felt something twist in her chest as she served them quietly, her smile brittle, hands slightly shaking. The woman was beautiful, confident, the kind of person who belonged in his world. They talked in low voices, and Sandra couldn't help but hear bits and pieces. She's just an old friend, Stephen had said. It's not like that. Sandra knew she shouldn't care. She wasn't part of his life, not really, but it hurt in a way she didn't expect. Later that night, after the woman had left and Stephen lingered at the counter, Sandra finally spoke. You don't have to explain, she said, not looking at him. Your life is your own. Stephen studied her. That's not what you think. Doesn't matter what I think, she replied softly. There was a long pause. Then he left. No tip, no smile, just a quiet goodbye. And for the first time, since he started coming, he didn't return the next day, or the day after. A week passed. Sandra threw herself into work, trying to forget the heaviness in her chest, but nothing could stop her mind from spinning. Why had she let herself believe he actually cared? That someone like him would really want to stay in touch with someone like her? Then, just when she thought it was over, a letter arrived. No return. Addressed just her name, written in familiar handwriting. She tore it open and unfolded the short note inside. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. There are things I want to tell you, things I haven't been able to say. If you'll let me. Meet me at 7 o'clock tomorrow, same place. Please. Her hands trembled as she held the letter. She had no idea what he meant, or what he was keeping from her, but the tightness in her chest told her she needed to find out. The next evening, she stood under the awning outside the café. It had started to drizzle again, the sky painted in dusky purples and grays. The city buzzed quietly in the background, and she kept glancing at the time. 7:01, 7:07. Just as she was about to turn back inside, a car pulled up. Stephen stepped out, his expression serious, not his usual easy smile. He walked toward her slowly, and she could see something in his eyes, something heavy. There's something I've been hiding, he said. No small talk, no war. And before I say anything else, I need to tell you the truth. Sandra froze, unsure what to expect. He looked nervous, really nervous. Not the kind of man who made billion-dollar deals, but someone raw, vulnerable. She nodded once. Okay, tell me. He glanced away, jaw tight. Then, finally, he spoke. You remember when we were kids? How I used to talk about my older brother? Yeah, she said slowly. You said he dropped out, got into trouble. Stephen nodded. That's what I told people. But the truth is, he didn't just disappear. He had died, and not by accident. Sandra blinked, confused. What do you mean? Stephen exhaled shakily. He took his own life, and I blamed myself for a long time. We were close, but I was so focused on proving myself, on becoming successful. I didn't see the signs. I thought I could fix everything, with money, success, but I couldn't bring him back. Sandra's throat tightened. That's why I show up here, Stephen said, voice trembling. Not just because we were friends, but because you remind me of the kind of person he needed, kind, grounded, real. And I guess I needed someone like that too. Sandra stared at him, stunned. The air between them felt thick. She didn't know what to say, but she could feel the pain in his words, the honesty, the weight, and the woman the other night. She asked quietly. Stephen gave a sad smile. An investor, that's all. I was trying to impress her, and I ended up pushing away the only person who ever made me feel human in years. Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. I didn't come back because I felt guilty, he said, stepping closer. I came back because I wanted to, because I care. More than I should, maybe, but I do. Sandra's heart raced. She wanted to believe him, but something in her still held back, not because of him, but because of everything life had done to her. Every promise that turned into silence. Every person who walked away. But before she could say anything, Stephen added, "I've been thinking about something. And maybe it's crazy, but what if we started something together? Something real, not just memories. A project, a business. I believe in you, Sandra. I believe in what you could do if someone just gave you a chance." Her breath caught, and just like that, the moment hung in the air, a heartbeat away from changing everything, but neither of them knew yet. Someone else was watching. Someone who had their own reasons for not wanting Stephen and Sandra to get too close. And soon, a secret from Sandra's past would come to light. One that could destroy everything they had just begun to rebuild. The clock kept ticking. The storm clouds rolled in, and the real test of trust was about to begin. The wind picked up as Stephen waited for her response, his hands tucked into his coat pockets, trying to read Sandra's face. She was quiet, eyes searching his like she was trying to decide if she could really trust what he was offering. Not just the opportunity, but him. All this time, she had been so careful not to rely on anyone. But something about his presence felt steady. Not like a rescue. Not like charity. Just ... real. "I don't know," she said softly, her voice barely above the sound of passing cars. "I've spent so long building walls around myself. I don't even know if I remember how to believe someone actually wants to help me." Stephen nodded. "Then let me prove it. No pressure. No expectations. Just a start." And just like that, the door cracked open. Over the next few weeks, something shifted. Stephen and Sandra began working quietly on a small project together, a mobile coffee truck idea that would bring affordable, locally brewed coffee to neighborhoods that didn't have access to cozy cafes, like the Silver Spoon. Stephen offered to fund it, but Sandra insisted on putting in whatever savings she had. She wanted it to be theirs, not just his. And Stephen respected that. Word spread fast. People were surprised to see a billionaire getting his hands dirty, showing up to community meetings, standing beside Sandra as they brainstormed names and colors for the truck. But what mattered most was that they were building something with meaning, something rooted in their shared past, and hope for the future. Just as everything was starting to come together, an unexpected letter showed up at the cafe addressed to Sandra. There was no name on the envelope, just a smudged stamp and shaky handwriting. Inside was a folded sheet of paper and a single photograph. Sandra in her 20s, standing beside a man whose face made her freeze, her ex-husband. The note was short. "He knows you're back on your feet. He's coming." Her hands went cold. She hadn't heard from him in years. After the divorce, he'd disappeared, leaving her with debt and broken trust. She had worked hard to escape that part of her life, the controlling, bitter man who once drained every ounce of her energy. And now, just when things were beginning to bloom, that shadow from the past had returned. Stephen noticed the change in her almost immediately. She was quieter, distant. One night, he found her sitting alone outside the cafe, staring into space. "Talk to me," he said gently, pulling up a chair beside her. She handed him the letter. He read it in silence, his jaw tightening. "You're not alone this time," he said. "I'm not scared of him," Sandra replied. "I'm scared of losing this. Of him ruining what we've built." "You built this," Stephen said. "Not him. He doesn't get to take anything from you anymore." But the fear lingered. A few days later, just as the mobile truck's launch day approached, her ex showed up. Not at the cafe, but at her apartment building. He stood there with that old, arrogant smirk, like he had every right to walk back into her life. "Looks like you landed on your feet," he said. "But you forgot to pay me back." She didn't answer. She simply closed the door in his face and called the police. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud, but it was the final chapter she had needed to close. Stephen stayed with her the whole time, never trying to take over, just offering steady support. When launch day arrived, the truck, named Second Cup, rolled onto the street with a ribbon, and a crowd gathered around. Sandra stood behind the counter, in a simple blue apron, her eyes wide with pride and disbelief. It wasn't just a business. It was a symbol that she had made it. On her own terms, Stephen gave a short speech. He didn't mention his wealth. He didn't talk about success or numbers. He simply said, "Sometimes, the person who changes your life isn't the one with the answers, it's the one who believes in you, when you've forgotten how to believe in yourself." The crowd clapped, but Sandra's eyes stayed on him. Weeks passed, then months. The truck became a favorite spot for early commuters and students. They served more than coffee. They served warmth, stories, and hope. Stephen still visited every morning, but less like a billionaire, and more like someone who belonged. Sandra had found her confidence again. not because someone gave it to her, but because she remembered she had it all along. One evening, as they cleaned up after a long day, Stephen leaned against the counter, watching her quietly. "You know," he said, "this started out as a simple visit. I just wanted lunch." She smiled. "And now," he took a breath, stepped closer. "Now, I don't want to leave." Sandra looked at him, her expression soft. There was no need for a grand gesture, no dramatic moment. Just two people standing in the quiet, knowing that life had brought them back to each other not by accident, but by grace. "I'm glad you came back," she whispered. "I never really left," he replied. And as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, casting long golden shadows across the truck's windows, they stood together, not as a billionaire and a waitress, but as two old friends who had rediscovered not only each other, but also their own strength, purpose, and the simple joy of starting over. Because sometimes, all it takes to change a life is recognizing the value of someone others stopped seeing long ago, and choosing to stay, no matter how much the world has changed.